Back boxing fans. Adi Aladipo, one of our YouTube brethren, who has obviously taken his YouTube fame and become a strong part of the zone with regards to football, English Premier League, and obviously basketball. Originally, he was doing a lot of African correspondence, and based on that experience, obviously got picked up and started doing a lot more global stuff and a lot more, obviously, domestic stuff in the UK. And congratulations to him. It's nice to see one of us break down that wall and sort of become part of the, of major media. He had this huge interview with the head of Saudi Arabian boxing, and not just boxing. Saudi Arabia obviously has been putting on concerts, music shows. They've been putting on tennis events and many other kind of sporting events with the biggest name in sports, right? To get, more of a PR, positive PR sort of thing towards Saudi Arabia, which obviously for a long time had a lot of negative perspective globally. Obviously they're super rich, but that only brings more negativity. Jealousy breeds contempt, right? And we've seen that obviously consistently. And now a lot of people, ironically, a lot of people that were pro-PBC talking about how great PBC was for boxing. They were going to make big fights. They were, giving us free boxing, and, we're really pushing the accolades of the PBC, which unfortunately it never lived up to that expectation because it didn't make the fights boxing fans wanted. Fighters were too inactive, and because of that, they lost a lot of momentum and a lot of money. Now, of course, we have this huge bank from Saudi Arabia who's really invested in pushing boxing. And the best thing we could ask for is that this is a consistent, regular type of situation. If that is the case, then as boxing fans, we're going to be winning, winning, and winning, right? I mean, that's all you can say. And if you haven't seen this interview with the head of Saudi Arabia, with Adi Aladipo, definitely check it out, because it gives you some good insight into this man who is really the face and the bank book to global boxing right now. And obviously their connection with the zone, I think, is a positive thing, because if we have one network, a global network, then boxers and boxing is going to get far bigger of a global audience. Not just an American audience, but a global audience. And I know you talked to some people about that. Yesterday, I put like a short up telling people that literally only 2 billion people in the world have computers. So that gives you a perspective of the fact that, there's over 8 billion people in the world. So easily 6 billion people in the world don't have access to computers or smart TVs. They can't watch these events the way you and I do. And sometimes I think people forget that, and they think everybody's in the same situation they are. But that's not the reality. Obviously, people have phones. Phones are a lot more of a practical sort of necessity. But it's hard to watch big boxing events and sporting events on your phone. If you've ever tried, you know what I mean. But that's what a lot of people, I guess, would be forced to. If you have to spend money to buy fights, then are you really going to be motivated to spend like $25, $35 to watch a fight on the screen of your phone? Probably not. But this guy is a real boxing fan. And that's really what makes me excited about the prospect of Saudi Arabia investing in boxing. They're giving us great fights, huge cards, deep cards. People talked about how for professional fighters that have invested their careers and their lives in the sport are going to be overlooked and not given the opportunity, but that's not true. If you look at some of the cards that are being made, you have all levels of fighters, not just heavyweights, but throughout all the weight classes. They're talking about bringing a Nui over. They talked about Bud Crawford coming over. Obviously, I think maybe even in this interview, because I haven't got to the end yet, they talk about Devin Haney and Tank Davis. And a lot of PBC guys and Tank Davis fans are acting like, well, Tank Davis is the A-side. Why would he do that? What do you mean, why wouldn't he? Why did Mike Tyson go to Japan twice? Why did Ali go to fucking Africa and the Philippines? Why did Foreman and Frazier go to Jamaica? People go global to make big fights and get paid the bag. That's why they did it. They did it in the fucking 70s. They did it in the 80s, the 90s. Why wouldn't they do it now? Right? Like, it makes no sense to try to somehow duck the biggest potential opportunity of your career to act like, well, he's the A-side in America. Why would he go do that? Give me a break. Are you a fucking boxing fan or a fucking narrative-driven fanboy? Because the reality of the situation is, as a boxing fan, you should be happy fighters are getting paid well and fights are being made. He goes into this and he talks about really what motivated him to get involved in boxing. Because they said, you know, of course, lots of money has been spent in boxing, more so than anything else. Obviously, we've seen a lot of money spent in football as well. Ronaldo and many other great international footballers have obviously also moved over to the Saudi Arabian Football League. But he said the main reason why boxing is the #1 thing that they're pushing is because he's a fan of boxing. He's been a fan for a long time, and he was very disappointed to see how boxing has fallen from the biggest global sport in the world to number 14 right now. Imagine that. And I mean, obviously with social media and the world and how it's evolving and changing, you can understand new, younger kids and people, you know, maybe they wouldn't be so gravitated towards boxing. You know, things happen. But for him, an older guy, he's not that old, but an older guy, he was disappointed seeing this. So he wants to try to help it. And in this interview with Ade Aladipo, he goes on to say, you know, the problem with boxing is you have a lot of problems with these promoters who don't want to make big fights. They don't want to work together because fights are too expensive and they don't want to risk profit. So we don't get a lot of the big fights that boxing fans want. We don't get a lot of cooperation. If you've seen what's going on with Saudi Arabia, they're trying to get every promoter involved. Promotional situations are not stopping fights from being made. It's not a hurdle or a problem at all. They don't care, right? They want to make boxing, so they make boxing. If you want to be a part of it, you come and you do it. He also goes on to talk about, obviously, there's a lot of fighters who don't want to make big fights, and that's all obviously a problem as well. He also goes in to talk about the 4 sanctioning bodies and the problem with that. And you know, these are some real problems hardcore boxing fans realize and have been talking about for a long time. A lot of things that have really pushed boxing down and not allowed new boxing fans to sort of gravitate and jump on board the sport. Because when you see there's 4 world champions, you don't understand. How does it make sense you have 4 #1 fighters? No matter how bad you are at math, you understand that there cannot be 4 #1s. That is numerically impossible. There can only be 1 #1, which is obviously why recently, specifically, people have been so gun-ho about undisputed world champions, because that's answered that question. You know that Canelo is the #1 fighter at 168, regardless of narratives from PBC fanboys. You know that Devin Haney was the #1 fighter at 135 pounds, regardless of PBC fanboys. You know that the winner of Usyk and Fury in the heavyweight division is going to be the #1 fighter in the heavyweight division, regardless of what you hear from PBC fanboys. You know, and this is consistent. Having these undisputed champions answers a lot of questions. Obviously, they still need to, you know, fight and retain their titles and fight the best competition in their division. I mean, that's an obvious sort of situation. We all expect that. But the problem is, the great thing about having one guy, at least now we know who everyone is chasing. We know who the name is, the face. We can attach it to it. He also goes on to say one of the problems currently is you don't have a lot of fighters with a lot of personality. And obviously in America, you can see how that would have had an impact. A lot of Mexican, Eastern European, and Asian fighters gravitated to the American market. But because they didn't really speak English, they weren't able to really become fan favorites in a conventional situation that a lot of Americans were used to, based on having American-dominated boxing previously, where you had just top-level American fighters. And obviously you could understand them, you could relate to them, and it was easier to build these guys into superstars in America. Not specifically globally, but in America, you could understand why these guys would get a lot more attention by the media and by just casual sports fans as well. But when you brought in foreigner fighters who worked for less money but weren't able to speak English, obviously that didn't help boxing grow in the States. But what it was supposed to do was help boxing grow globally. But the problem is, because of all the disjointed sort of situations we have in boxing with the promotional companies, with the sanctioning bodies, it never really was able to do that. Even though people tried to do it. Bob Arum tried to break into the Asian market. You know, obviously Matchroom and Eddie Hearn tried to break into the US market from Europe. And we've seen other promoters try to do that, but it hasn't worked nearly as effectively as we would have liked, right? So let's just do a quick little segment. I don't want to steal any of Ade Aladipo's content, since obviously this is great for his channel and great for him, even though this is DAZN and not his personal channel, but nonetheless, it's so fantastic for him as a guy. But let's just use a couple seconds just to give a perspective of who this man is.
A lot of cameras, a lot of things similar to what you have seen them do. They do it right because they are company, and they are the only company. For that, we are coming with new strategy and new idea, new vision, with sporting of the vision of 2030 in our country, to do and deliver to the market the best fight with good price and make the fight that people want to see it. We don't want to waste it.
And that's the whole point. That's what us as boxing fans want. I don't understand how anybody can be against this. And you can see his perspective. We're trying to give people the best fights at a reasonable price. And by doing that, like the UFC and the success they've had, it will translate to boxing. Luckily, if you use DAZN, you also don't have just an American market, you also have a global market. Obviously, in Saudi Arabia, the UK and obviously Europe are on the same timeline, basically, as Saudi Arabia, so it makes it very convenient for Europe and European boxing fans to be involved. For Americans, not so much. But if you have a lot of top American fighters in Saudi Arabia, that's the motivation for Americans to watch the fights. If it's on DAZN, and obviously you have access to see it on your smart TV, your iPad, your laptop, and your phone, you have super large access to see these events. And that in itself is a fantastic situation. That's why I was hoping the PBC would go over to DAZN, and we would just really sort of not create a UFC model for boxing, but by having them all fight on the same platform, it would open a lot of doors to making possible fights, that you wouldn't have the same promotional issues you have generally, right? But unfortunately, that didn't happen. But it still may happen moving into the future, because we don't know what's going to happen with the whole Amazon deal. I mean, we're still waiting to see when the first PBC fight card is actually going to be announced. You know, generally the PBC comes out early in January, releases their whole first, quarters fights, and gets a huge buzz around their fights, right? That's generally what they do year after year after year. But obviously this year, they haven't been able to do that. And that's a little different than historically they've done. You can go back last year and see it, and the year before that, and the year before that. And it's always been a model for the PBC to come out at the beginning of the year, a big buzz by releasing all the fights that you had, and trying to get a big buzz behind it. Right now, it's Saudi Arabia that's doing that. And, you know, for me as a boxing fan, I've always said, I don't care who gives us boxing, as long as we get boxing. And of course, I'm excited about Saudi Arabia, because we're going to get the Bivol better be a fight. We're going to get the Usyk and Fury fight. Already they came out in an interview with Eddie Hearn to say that in him talking to Turki Alalshikh, it's already been confirmed that the winner of Fury Usyk and the winner of Ngannou versus AJ is going to fight for the undisputed world heavyweight title as well. So that's another huge fight. They talked about obviously bringing Terence Crawford to Saudi Arabia to fight Tim Tszyu. They're talking about bringing Tank Davis to Saudi Arabia to fight Devin Haney. They're talking about bringing Inoue to Saudi Arabia to fight MJ Akhmadov. I mean, what's not to like? All we can say is, please more, right? Please more. Please make more of these fights. Let's have Canelo go fight fucking David Benavidez in Saudi Arabia too, so that fight's confirmed. And Al Haymon and the PBC knows they're getting paid, but they're not risking anything by making the fight because they're not the ones who are taking up the responsibility, right? Everybody wins. Literally everybody wins. The boxers, the promoters, obviously not the networks, but right now in America, there's ESPN, who's still going to get their top-ranked fights, and there's DAZN. Really, those are the only two boxing networks anyway. So the networks is going to benefit. The promoters are benefiting. Of course, the sanctioning bodies always benefit because they get a percentage. And if the purses are big, then their percentages go up. So they have more onus to just say, okay, fuck it. Let's do what you guys want to do, which is basically what's happening. You see the IBF stripped J.O. Pitaya. Now what's happening? J.O. Pitaya is fighting Briedis for that vacant IBF title because the Saudi Arabians went, what? Shut the fuck up. That ain't fucking happening. Get real. We'll fight Briedis and J.O. Pitaya for the belt in Saudi Arabia. We'll pay for it. You guys fuck off with your bullshit. Everyone knows he's the champion. And this is great because now they're holding the sanctioning bodies accountable as well. So I think more is better. Obviously, you can't make everyone agree. We've already seen a big groundswell in the US who are really anti this, but the reality is, why are they anti it? They act like somehow this is costing America something. But casinos in America, because they had money, have historically put on boxing. Not because they gave a fuck about the boxers or they built up the boxers' fan bases, because generally Vegas, most boxers aren't from Vegas, but because they have money. When you have big events in Vegas, boxing and singers and dancers and circuses and all these kind of things, it pulls big money gamblers to Vegas who lose a lot of money. That's why they comp you hotels, they comp you dinner, they comp you drinks, they comp you tickets to these fucking type of events, right? That's what the Vegas hotels do because they want to get you to go there to spend all your money at the casino. So that's historically why casinos funded and push boxing. So it's no different than Saudi Arabia. You know, no difference at all. But let me know what you think about this. If you haven't seen the interview, go check it out. There's the name right there. As you can see, His Excellency Turki Alalshikh interview, Making the Biggest. DAZN Boxing, obviously, Ade Oladipo is the interviewer. So congratulations to him. And yeah, let's go.